Life at the camp was simple but tough. Every day was about drills, fixing gear, and waiting for orders. The air was always thick with dust, and the nights were biting cold. We took comfort in little things: the smell of instant coffee brewing, the sound of tools clinking as we cleaned our weapons, or the rare laugh during casual banter. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the rhythm that kept us grounded in a world that often felt chaotic. My tentmate Wilson was a quiet guy. He mostly kept to himself, rarely joining in on the jokes or complaints that passed the time. When he did speak, it was usually a sarcastic comment or a dark joke that made you stop and wonder what was going on in his head. He wasn't unfriendly, just distant. But there was something about him that made you pay attention, a sharpness in his eyes, like he saw everything but chose what to say sparingly. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Wilson walked up to me with something in his hand. "Here," he said, extending it toward me. I took it, not sure what to expect. It was a small, strange-looking device, smooth and dark, with faintly glowing symbols etched into its surface. It didn't look like anything I'd seen before, not military-issued, not anything from the outside world I could recognize. Wilson's face was serious as he leaned in slightly. "Don't show this to anyone. If they'd find out, we're both dead." His tone was flat, matter-of-fact, like he was talking about the weather. Then he turned and walked off, leaving me standing there, holding this thing that now felt heavier in my hand. Later that night, when I was alone in the tent, I pulled it out again to get a better look. It wasn't big, about the size of my palm, but it felt dense, like it was packed with something important. As I held it, I noticed a faint hum, like it was alive in some way. The symbols glowed softly, steady and mesmerizing. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't ordinary. And something about it made my stomach twist, like I was holding on to trouble. Wilson started acting strange after that night. He would check the windows of our tent repeatedly, sometimes muttering under his breath. When I asked him about it, he'd wave me off, saying I should just focus on keeping my head down. "Act normal," he'd say, with a nervous edge in his voice that didn't fit the calm, sarcastic guy I thought I knew. The camp, on the other hand, went on as usual. Long days of training exercises, cleaning weapons, and hanging out with the guys. But now I was carrying a secret that felt heavier with each passing day. The device stayed hidden, tucked away in my pack, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I kept replaying Wilson's words in my head. If they'd find out, we're both dead. One afternoon, while working on our rifles, I'd overheard Wilson talking to another soldier. His voice was low, but there was an urgency in his tone. I couldn't make out the words, but the other guy looked uneasy, glancing around like he didn't want to be seen with Wilson. The conversation ended quickly, and Wilson walked away without a word. Things got weirder. The camp started having random power outages, and some of the equipment we used in training began acting up. At first, it seemed like bad luck, but then I noticed the timing. Every time I took the device up to look at it, even for a few seconds, something in the camp would glitch. Radios would crackle with static, lights would flicker, or the power would cut out completely. I started to wonder if the device was causing it. One night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window of our tent, watching the camp in the moonlight. Everything was quiet, but there was a tension in the air that I couldn't shake. Wilson was lying on his cot, but I could tell he wasn't asleep. His breathing was too even, too controlled. He was pretending. "Wilson," I whispered. He didn't answer. "What's really going on?" For a long moment he stayed silent. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Just stay out of it. Whatever you do, don't let them know you have it." "Who's them?" I asked, but he didn't reply. Instead, he rolled over, turning his back to me. I sat there for a while longer, staring out at the camp, feeling more alone than I ever had before. The days after that were tense. Wilson kept to himself more than usual, and the device felt like a weight in my pack. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. One evening, while I was alone in the tent, I decided to take the device out again. I ran my fingers over the glowing symbols, and before I knew it, something happened. The symbols lit up brighter, and a small hologram projected into the air above it. It showed a set of coordinates and an emblem that I didn't recognize. The image flickered and then disappeared, but it left me with more questions than answers. Why would Wilson give me something like this? What was I supposed to do with it? I wanted to ask Wilson, but he was harder to approach now. Every time I tried to bring it up, He brushed me off or changed the subject. I started watching him more closely, trying to figure out what he was hiding. One night, I overheard him talking to someone outside the tent. The voices were low, but I caught enough to know they were arguing about something important. "We can't stay here much longer," Wilson said. "They're already looking for it." Who was looking for it? And why? I stayed quiet, listening, but the conversation ended quickly, and I didn't dare confront him about it. The next day, things at the camp got worse. The power outages were more frequent, and the tension among the soldiers was palpable. It felt like we were on the edge of something big, but no one knew what, except maybe Wilson. It started with a rumor. Someone said they saw strangers near the camp, men in uniforms that didn't match ours. They claimed to be inspectors, but their questions didn't sit right with anyone. They weren't asking about supplies or protocols. They were asking about people, specific soldiers. That night, I was on watch duty. The camp was quiet, but my nerves were shot. Around midnight, I saw movement near Wilson's tent. It was too dark to make out who it was, but they didn't move like any soldier I knew. They were careful, deliberate, like they were searching for something. I stayed in the shadows, watching. My heart pounded in my chest as the figure slipped into Wilson's tent. Minutes passed, and then they came out again, moving quickly and disappearing into the darkness. I waited, unsure if I should say anything. If they were looking for the device, I couldn't risk exposing myself. The next morning, Wilson was tense. He didn't say much, but I could tell he knew something had happened. "They're getting closer," he muttered. "We need to be ready." "Ready for what?" I asked, but he didn't answer. Instead, he started packing his things, moving with a sense of urgency that made my stomach turn. That night, I stayed up again watching the camp. I didn't see anything unusual. The feeling of being watched never left me. Whatever was happening, it wasn't over yet. Late that night, I was woken by muffled sounds coming from Wilson's side of the tent. A scuffle, hurried whispers, and then the faint hum of an engine outside. I bolted upright, heart racing, and looked over to his cot. It was empty. I stepped outside, but there was nothing to see. Just the quiet camp under a moonlit sky. No vehicles, no shadows, just the eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. By morning, Wilson's belongings were gone, and when I asked around, no one seemed to remember him clearly. "Wilson who?" One soldier asked, his brow furrowed like he genuinely didn't know. It was like Wilson had been erased from existence. The only proof I had that he ever existed was the device, still hidden in my pack. My mind raced with questions, but one thought stood out. Was I next? Later that day, while packing my gear, I found a small slip of paper tucked into my bag. It was a note, written in Wilson's handwriting. "They're coming. Get out. Follow the coordinates." My stomach churned. The coordinates, the same ones I'd seen in the device's hologram. Was this what Wilson had been trying to protect? If so, why give it to me? None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stay here. The decision to leave wasn't easy. Desertion wasn't just breaking the rules. It was a death sentence if I got caught. But staying felt just as dangerous. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening, something I didn't understand. And if I stayed, I might not live long enough to figure it out. I told the others I was going on a solo training exercise, packed my gear, and left before dawn. The coordinates pointed to a location far from the camp, deep into rugged terrain. It wasn't an easy journey. The path was treacherous, with steep cliffs, dense forests, and freezing rivers. My training kept me going, but every step felt heavier, like the weight of the device was dragging me down. The worst part was the feeling of being followed. It started as a nagging suspicion, a snapped branch, a rustle in the bushes, but soon became impossible to ignore. I wasn't alone out here. I set up camp one night, building a small fire to keep warm. As I sat there, eating from an MRE pack, I thought I saw movement in the shadows beyond the firelight. My hand instinctively went to my weapon, but nothing emerged. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. The next day, I found faint footprints in the mud, too large to be mine. Whoever was following me wasn't trying very hard to stay hidden anymore. My mind raced with possibilities. Were they from the camp? Or worse, the same people Wilson had warned me about? By the time I reached the coordinates, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. But what I found there made it all worth it. A hidden entrance to an underground bunker, camouflaged so well it would have been invisible if I hadn't been looking for it. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, ready to find out what this was all about. Inside the bunker, the air was cold and stale, carrying the metallic tone of old machinery. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing walls lined with strange equipment. Most of it was broken, with wires hanging loose and monitors covered in a layer of dust. But some of it still hummed faintly, like it was waiting to be used. I moved cautiously, every step echoing in the silence. The deeper I went, the more unsettling it became. Doors creaked as I pushed them open, revealing rooms filled with charts, blueprints, and files in a language I couldn't read. One room had a large monitor that flickered weakly, displaying a distorted image of what looked like a map. It marked locations I didn't recognize, each with strange symbols beside them. Then I heard it, a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but it grew louder, repeating a single word I couldn't make out. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I froze. The whisper stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving an eerie silence. I found a desk with more files scattered across it. One of them caught my eye, a schematic of the device. It didn't explain much, but it showed connections to something larger, something that looked like a network of machines. My heart raced. Whatever this device was, it wasn't just important, it was dangerous. I wasn't alone in the bunker. As I turned a corner, I heard footsteps, heavy boots on metal flooring. I quickly ducked into a side room, pressing myself against the wall. Peeking out, I saw a group of men, armed and moving with purpose. They weren't soldiers from my camp. Their uniforms were darker, and they carried advanced weapons I didn't recognize. They were searching for something, or someone. I stayed hidden, my breath shallow as they passed by. Once they were out of sight, I crept through the bunker, keeping to the shadows. My training kicked in, helping me stay silent and alert. I needed to find out who they were and why they were here. In one of the rooms, I found a terminal that still worked. Its screen displayed a string of commands, but before I could make sense of it, I heard voices approaching. Panicking, I turned off the screen and hid under the desk. The men entered, talking in hushed tones. "The device's signal was last traced here," one of them said. "If we don't find it, you know what'll happen." "Yeah, but what about him?" Another voice asked. "Think he'll show?" "He's not stupid. If he's here, we'll find him." They left after a few minutes, but their words echoed in my head. They were looking for the device, and they were looking for me. I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. It was only a matter of time before they found me or the device. I needed to come up with a plan fast. The bunker felt like a trap, a labyrinth of corridors and rooms that only seemed to lead me closer to danger. The men were still in the facility, their voices echoing faintly through the metal walls. I moved as quietly as I could, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I had to find a way out. As I crept through the halls, I noticed something. The faint hum of the device in my pack seemed to get stronger. It wasn't just a sensation, it was real. The device was responding to something in the bunker. Maybe it was connected to the equipment here, or maybe it was acting as a beacon. Either way, it was a risk I couldn't ignore. I came across a room with a reinforced door slightly ajar. Inside, the equipment looked more advanced, sleek consoles and blinking lights that still worked despite the age of the facility. In the center of the room was a large screen displaying a live map. My location was marked with a blinking red dot. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They weren't just tracking the device, they were tracking me. Footsteps approached. I grabbed a metal rod from the ground and pressed myself into the shadows. The door creaked open, and one of the men entered, scanning the room. His weapon was drawn, his movements cautious. I held my breath, waiting for the right moment. As he turned his back to me, I swung the rod with all my strength, striking him across the head. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. I grabbed his weapon, a compact rifle that felt unfamiliar in my hands, and slipped out of the room. The alarm sounded moments later. They knew I was here. Adrenaline kicked in as I sprinted down the hall, searching for an exit. The corridors blurred around me, every turn looking the same. The sound of boots pounding the floor grew louder behind me. I could hear them shouting orders. "Block the exits. Don't let him get out." My lungs burned, but I pushed forward, my mind racing. I couldn't let them catch me. I reached a staircase leading up and took it 2 steps at a time, the sound of pursuit growing fainter behind me. At the top, I found a hatch leading outside. I pushed it open, and the cool night air hit me like a wave of relief. But there was no time to stop. I bolted into the darkness, the bunker disappearing behind me. The forest was dense, the trees offering some cover as I moved through the underbrush. The moonlight barely pierced the canopy, but it was enough to see the trail ahead. The device in my pack hummed louder, almost vibrating against my back. I didn't know if it was warning me or guiding me. The sound of pursuit returned. Flashlights cut through the trees, and voices called out to each other. "Spread out. He's close." I didn't stop. I couldn't. My legs ached, my breath came in gasps, but the fear of capture drove me forward. The forest seemed endless, each step taking me deeper into the unknown. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the device was pulling me somewhere, leading me to something I didn't yet understand. I collapsed against a tree, the device in my pack still humming like an angry wasp. My chest heaved as I tried to catch my breath, my ears straining for any sound of pursuit. The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. The flashlights and voices seemed farther away now, but I knew they wouldn't give up. I pulled the device from my pack. Its glow had intensified, and the symbols on its surface shifted like they were alive. My fingers trembled as I held it, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, the hum stopped. The glow dimmed to a soft pulse, and a single light flickered on the side, an unmistakable indicator. A signal was being sent. My stomach dropped. I hadn't done anything to activate it, but the device clearly had a mind of its own. I watched as a faint beam of light shot into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. Panic set in. If the men chasing me didn't already know where I was, they certainly did now. I stuffed the device back into my pack and started moving again. Every step felt heavier, weighed down by the knowledge that I might have just sealed my fate. But then something unexpected happened. A faint buzz came from my pocket, my old military radio, something I hadn't used since leaving the camp. I pulled it out, expecting static, but instead, a voice crackled through. "Unknown operator, respond. This is Echo Command." I froze. The voice was calm, professional. Whoever it was, they weren't part of the group chasing me. But that didn't mean I could trust them. "Who is this?" I whispered into the radio, keeping my voice low. "We received your signal," the voice replied. "We can help, but you need to give us your coordinates." The words hung in the air. Help. It sounded too good to be true. My instinct screamed to ignore it, to keep running. But part of me, desperate and exhausted, wanted to believe them. "I don't know who you are," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I don't know if I can trust you." There was a pause. Then the voice spoke again, softer this time. "We're not your enemies. But if you don't trust us, they will find you first. And you know what they'll do." The weight of the device pressed against my back, a silent reminder of what was at stake. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned off the radio and shoved it back into my pocket. I needed time to think, to figure out my next move. But time wasn't on my side. A distant shout echoed through the forest, followed by the unmistakable crack of a gunshot. They were closing in. I started running again, the radio buzzing in my pocket, the device pulsing in my pack. I didn't know if I was running towards salvation or a trap, but one thing was clear. I couldn't stop now. The forest seemed endless, each step taking me deeper into a labyrinth of trees and shadows. The device in my pack had quieted, its hum fading to a faint vibration, as if it was holding its breath, just like me. I kept moving, my ears tuned to every sound, every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves. The gunshots had stopped, but the tension in the air told me they weren't far behind. Suddenly, I heard it. A voice, low and urgent, coming from ahead. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the stolen rifle slung over my shoulder. Peering through the underbrush, I spotted a figure crouched near a small clearing. They weren't armed, at least not visibly, and their stance wasn't aggressive. "Over here," the voice whispered sharply. "Hurry." Every instinct screamed at me to run the other way. But something about the figure, the way they stayed low, scanning the area, told me they weren't one of the pursuers. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer, my grip tight on the rifle. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping my voice low. "Friend," they replied, glancing around nervously. "You're not safe here. Neither am I." Before I could respond, Another voice came from behind me. He's telling the truth. They're close. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. Another figure emerged from the trees, a woman with sharp eyes and a scar running down her cheek. She was armed, but her weapon was lowered. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We've been tracking them," the woman said, her tone clipped. "The ones hunting you. You're lucky we found you first." "And why should I trust you?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. The man stepped closer, holding up his hands. "You shouldn't. But we're your only chance of getting out of this alive." They led me to a makeshift camp hidden in a hollow surrounded by dense trees. It was small, with a single tent and a fire pit that had been recently extinguished. The woman, who introduced herself as Harper, wasted no time explaining. "They're part of an organization," she said, sitting cross-legged by the fire pit. "Black Ops, off the books. They deal in things that shouldn't exist, like that device you're carrying." I tensed, my hand unconsciously moving to the pack. "How do you know about the device?" "We've been tracking it for months," Harper said. "And Wilson." Hearing his name felt like a punch to the gut. "You knew Wilson?" "Not personally," she admitted, "but we knew he was trying to get the device out. We just didn't know he'd pass it to you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to believe them, to let someone else carry this burden. But another part, the part that had been running and fighting for my life, wasn't ready to trust so easily. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Harper and the man exchanged a look. "Because if they get their hands on that device," Harper said, "it won't just be you who's in danger. They'll use it to tip the scales, on a global level. Governments, economies, entire nations could fall." The weight of her words settled over me like a lead blanket. I didn't understand the full extent of what the device could do, but I knew enough to realize it was powerful and dangerous. But trust is a fragile thing, especially in situations like this. Later that night, as we rested by the fire, I noticed the man, Logan. He'd said his name was, speaking in hushed tones with someone on a radio. I couldn't make out the words, but his posture was tense, and his eyes darted toward me more than once. Something wasn't right. I waited until he stepped away, then crept over to the radio. It was still on, the faint crackle of static filling the silence. And then I heard it. "He doesn't suspect a thing," Logan's voice said. "We'll hand him over tomorrow. Just make sure the payment's ready." My blood ran cold. Betrayal. I backed away, my mind racing. Harper seemed genuine, but if Logan was working against us, could I trust her? And if I couldn't trust them, who could I trust? The betrayal hit hard, but I couldn't let my emotions get the better of me. If Logan was planning to hand me over, I had to move fast. I slipped away from the camp, my rifle slung over my shoulder, and the device pulsing faintly in my pack. The forest was my only ally now, and I had to use it to my advantage. As I navigated through the dense underbrush, Harper's words replayed in my mind. Entire nations could fall. The weight of the device seemed heavier with every step, as though it knew its importance. But what exactly was it? I needed answers. By dawn, I stumbled upon a clearing with the remnants of an old structure. Another part of the bunker system, perhaps. It was partially collapsed, but a narrow passageway led underground. I hesitated for a moment, then forced myself inside, hoping this would bring clarity. The tunnel was cold and dark, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. My flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing rusted metal walls and scattered debris. Deeper inside, I found a control room, much like the one in the first bunker. But this one was intact. Monitors blinked, and a faint hum filled the air. I approached the largest screen, which displayed a diagram that looked eerily familiar. It was the device, but not just the device. The diagram showed it connected to a vast network, each node linked to a location across the globe. Beneath the diagram, a single phrase repeated in a language I didn't understand. I pressed a button on the console, and the screen shifted to a series of video feeds. My blood ran cold as I realized what I was seeing: footage of military bases, government buildings, and critical infrastructure. The device wasn't just powerful. It was a key, a control mechanism for something far larger. Then I found the logs. They were encrypted, but one file had been left open. It was a message addressed to someone named Wilson. The device is the linchpin. If they activate the network, they'll gain control over everything: communications, power grids, defense systems. You can't let it fall into their hands. Destroy it if you have to. Destroy it? My stomach churned. I didn't know if I could bring myself to do that. What if there was another way? A noise behind me snapped me out of my thoughts. I spun around, rifle raised, as Harper stepped into the room, her hands up in a gesture of peace. "You've been busy," she said, her voice calm but wary. "How did you find me?" I demanded, keeping the rifle trained on her. "I followed the signal," she admitted, glancing at the device in my pack. "And I needed to stop you before you did something stupid." "Like trust Logan," I shot back. Her expression darkened. "Logan's a traitor. I didn't know until last night, but I swear I'm not with him. I'm here to help." I didn't lower the rifle. "Why should I believe you?" "Because if I wanted to betray you, I would have let him turn you in," she said firmly. "But instead, I came here to warn you. Whatever that device is connected to, it's bigger than you or me. If they get their hands on it, the world as we know it is done." Her words mirrored the message in the logs. I lowered the rifle slightly, though my grip remained firm. "What do we do?" She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "We stop them. But first, we need to get out of here. They'll be coming for both of us now." I glanced at the console, then at the device. The weight of the decision pressed down on me. For now, all I could do was follow Harper's lead, and hope she was telling the truth. The escape was chaotic. Harper and I moved through the forest as fast as we could, the faint hum of the device seeming to grow louder with each step. It wasn't long before the faint sounds of pursuit reached us, voices shouting, branches snapping under heavy boots. They were closing in. Harper led the way, her movements swift and sure, while I kept my rifle ready, scanning the shadows for any sign of an ambush. "We need to find high ground," she whispered, her breath coming in sharp bursts. "It'll give us a better chance." We reached a rocky incline that led to a ridge overlooking the forest. Climbing it was slow, the loose stones threatening to give way underfoot, but we made it to the top. From here, we could see the forest stretching out in all directions. It would have been beautiful if not for the danger. Harper pulled a pair of binoculars from her pack and scanned the area below. "They're spreading out," she said grimly. "It's only a matter of time before they find us." I tightened my grip on the rifle. "Then we make our stand here." She glanced at me, her expression hard but approving. "We don't have a choice." We set up a defensive position, using the natural rock formations as cover. Harper handed me a small device, a remote detonator linked to a line of makeshift explosives she'd raked earlier. "When they get too close, use this," she instructed. "It'll buy us time." The first group appeared within minutes, their dark uniforms blending into the shadows of the forest. I counted at least 5, moving in formation, their weapons drawn. Harper fired the first shot, taking out one of them with precision. The rest scattered, shouting orders. "Stay low," Harper hissed, reloading her weapon. The firefight was brutal. Bullets ricocheted off the rocks around us, and the air was thick with the sharp smell of gunpowder. I fired back, taking down one of the men as he tried to flank us. Harper moved like she'd done this 100 times, her shots deliberate and deadly. Then the second wave came. More voices, more boots pounding the ground. Harper handed me a spare clip, her jaw set in determination. "We can't hold them all forever," she said. "If they get to us, they'll take the device." I glanced at my pack, the faint glow of the device visible through the fabric. "What if we destroy it?" Her eyes widened. "That's not an option. Not yet." Before I could respond, the explosives went off, a deafening boom shaking the ridge. The men below shouted in panic as debris rained down. Harper grabbed my arm. "Move. Now." We retreated further along the ridge, the echoes of the explosion still ringing in my ears. But the reprieve was short-lived. The third wave was already closing in, and this time, they weren't taking any chances. A drone buzzed overhead, its camera fixed on us. "They've got eyes on us," I shouted. Harper cursed under her breath, pulling a small EMP device from her pack. She threw it into the air, and the drone sputtered and crashed into the trees below. "That'll slow them down," she said. But it's not enough. We reached a narrow path that led down the other side of the ridge. Harper stopped, her expression grim. "Go," she said. "I'll hold them off." "No way," I said firmly. "We stick together." "You don't understand," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "If we both stay, neither of us makes it out. You have to get the device out of here." Before I could argue, she pressed something into my hand. A map with coordinates marked in red. "This is the next location," she said. "It's the only place we have a chance." "Harper," I started, but she cut me off. "Go," she shouted, firing a burst of rounds at the approaching figures. I hesitated, then turned and ran, the weight of the device in my pack heavier than ever. As I descended the ridge, the sounds of gunfire and shouts grew fainter. But Harper's final words stayed with me. "Get the device out of here." I didn't look back. The forest blurred around me as I ran, my legs burning and lungs straining for air. The weight of the device in my pack felt unbearable, its faint hum a constant reminder of the danger that followed me. Harper's voice echoed in my mind. "Get the device out of here." I stopped briefly to check the map she had given me. The coordinates pointed to a location deep within the forest, marked by a red circle and labeled Safe Zone. I didn't know what I would find there, but it was my only chance. The path wasn't easy. The terrain grew rougher, the underbrush thicker. Every snap of a branch or rustle of leaves sent my heart racing. I knew they were still behind me, tracking me like prey. The device was their prize, and they wouldn't stop until they had it. As night fell, the forest grew colder, the shadows deeper. I found a narrow stream and followed it, hoping the water would mask my trail. My mind raced with plans and counterplans. The map suggested there was an outpost or some kind of shelter ahead. If I could just reach it, I might have a chance to regroup and figure out my next move. The sound of a drone shattered the silence. I looked up, spotting its blinking light through the treetops. It was smaller than the one Harper had taken down, but its purpose was clear. It was scouting for me. I ducked into the underbrush, trying to stay out of sight, but the hum of its rotors grew louder. It had locked onto my position. I pulled out the EMP device Harper had given me, her last lifeline. My hands trembled as I activated it, throwing it toward the drone. The device emitted a high-pitched whine before exploding in a flash of light. The drone sputtered and spiraled out of control, crashing into the trees with a satisfying thud. But the explosion had given away my location. Shouts echoed through the forest, followed by the distinct crack of gunfire. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my heart pounding. The terrain grew steeper, the rocks slick with moss. I stumbled more than once but forced myself to keep moving. Finally, I saw it. A faint glow through the trees. The safe zone. It was an old cabin half hidden by overgrown foliage. Its windows glowed dimly with light, and an antenna jutted from the roof. I approached cautiously, my rifle at the ready. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, the room lit by a single flickering bulb. The cabin was sparsely furnished, just a table, a few chairs, and a dusty cot. A terminal sat in the corner, its screen displaying a login prompt. I closed the door behind me and bolted it, my hands shaking. The terminal powered on as I approached, and a message flashed across the screen. "Input authorization code." I froze. Authorization code? My mind raced. I didn't have any codes, just the device and the map. I pulled the device from my pack, its glow pulsing softly. As if sensing the terminal, it emitted a soft chime and projected a holographic keypad. I hesitated, then entered the coordinates Harper had given me. The terminal buzzed and the screen flickered before displaying a new message. "Access granted. Activating defense protocols." The sound of mechanical whirring filled the cabin as panels in the walls slid open, revealing automated turrets. The whirring was followed by the unmistakable clicks of weapons locking into place. I stared in disbelief as the turrets swiveled to face the door. Before I could process what was happening, the cabin shook with the sound of gunfire. The pursuers had found me. Bullets slammed into the door and walls, but the turrets roared to life, their precision fire cutting through the chaos. I ducked behind the table, clutching the device as the cabin became a war zone. Minutes felt like hours as the turrets held off the attackers. Finally, the gunfire stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. I peeked out from my cover, heart pounding. The turrets were still active, their barrels smoking. Through the window, I saw bodies scattered among the trees. For the moment, I was safe, but I knew this wasn't over. The device's secrets were still locked away, and the fight for it was far from finished. The silence after the firefight was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the device in my hands. The turrets in the cabin stood motionless, their barrels smoking and angled toward the lifeless forest. I lowered my rifle slowly, my chest heaving as the adrenaline coursing through me began to wane. I couldn't stay here. The terminal screen flickered again, pulling my attention. A new message appeared. Secondary coordinates acquired. Proceed immediately. A map flashed on the screen, highlighting another location miles away. My heart sank. It seemed like the device wasn't done with me yet. I grabbed what little I could find in the cabin, an old canteen, a few stale energy bars, and a spare flashlight, and stuffed them into my pack alongside the device. My body screamed for rest, but the clock was ticking. The organization wouldn't stop just because I'd won one skirmish. Reinforcements would come, and they'd be stronger, faster, and more prepared. The forest outside the cabin was still, the bodies of my pursuers scattered among the trees. I avoided looking at their faces, guilt clawing at the edges of my thoughts. They had chosen this path, I told myself, but the justification felt hollow. As I moved deeper into the forest, the terrain grew rougher, the air colder. The device hummed again, its glow faint but constant. It wasn't just a burden anymore. It felt like it was guiding me, pulling me towards something I couldn't yet understand. By dawn, I reached the edge of a rocky outcrop that overlooked a sprawling valley. In the distance, I could make out faint shapes, buildings, antennae, and the glint of steel in the morning light. The coordinates on the map matched this location. It wasn't just another hideout. It was a stronghold. I sat down to catch my breath, my thoughts racing. Harper's sacrifice weighed heavily on me, her last words echoing in my mind. Get the device out of here. But now, it seemed like the device wanted me to take it somewhere, to use it for a purpose I still didn't fully understand. The radio in my pocket crackled to life, startling me. A familiar voice came through, calm and measured. We see you. Approach carefully. I froze, my grip tightening on the radio. Who is this? Echo Command, the voice replied. You've reached the rendezvous point. Rendezvous point? My instincts screamed that this could be another trap, but I had no other options. The stronghold ahead might hold the answers I've been chasing since Wilson handed me the device. Or it might be the end of the line. I adjusted my pack, the devices hummed steady against my back, and started down the rocky path toward the valley. Every step felt heavier, not just from exhaustion but from the weight of everything I'd lost, and everything I still had to fight for. As I neared the base, figures emerged, armed but not hostile. They held their weapons low, watching me with wary eyes. One of them stepped forward, a man with a commanding presence and a stern expression. You're late, he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. I wasn't exactly on a schedule. I shot back, my voice hoarse. He studied me for a moment, then nodded toward the device. Is it intact? I hesitated, then pulled the device from my pack. Its glow pulsed faintly, as though it recognized its destination. The man's eyes softened slightly, a flicker of relief crossing his face. You've done well to get it this far, he said, but the real work starts now. I frowned. What is this? What's so important about this thing? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for me to follow. You'll see soon enough. For now, you need rest, and then we'll talk. As I stepped into the stronghold, the weight of the journey began to lift, replaced by a new tension. The device had led me here for a reason, but I still didn't know what that reason was. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope and a spark of fear. Whatever came next, it wasn't the end. It was just the beginning.